So next we have Donna Flood from the Welfare Rights Centre. And Donna will be presenting today on Lots of Knots, Untangling the Social Security Safety Net to Increase Carers' Access to Financial Security.
Hi everyone, and thank you for having me. I'll also be obviously happy to answer questions at the end, and I notice that there's a question in there already about a Centrelink issue, so I'm happy to address that right at the end because that's going to be something that I'm going to be able to answer. Look, I'm happy to make my slides available as well to anyone that's interested. There's links and phone numbers that will be on the slide, so I think probably the best way, if you're interested in having them, is maybe contacting Carers New South Wales or maybe popping it in the chat and we might be able to work out how to get them to you. Okay, Hayden, would you be able to pop to the next one? So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently sitting on Gadigal land, the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. This land is and always will be Aboriginal land and was never ceded. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Look, what I thought I'd do is at first is actually just introduce who I am and where I come from. So the Welfare Rights Centre is a community legal centre. It is one of a number of legal centres in New South Wales. We're all free legal centres that offer free legal advice and representation. We do all sorts of different types of law. For the Welfare Rights Centre, we are a specialist centre. We focus completely on helping people with their payments from Centrelink. We are located in Sydney, but that blue area of the map is our catchment area. We help anyone in New South Wales. There is a solicitor down at the Illawarra Legal Centre who does work on the South Coast, and we help each other out and we work together when needed. The next slide, please, Hayden. So the sorts of services that we offer is just advice, one-off or ongoing advice. We will represent Centrelink into the tribunal and to the courts, and we also offer community education to organisations that want to learn more about social security law. One of the really big things that people who have a relationship with Centrelink don't realise, and is a massive problem, is that if you have a problem with Centrelink, if Centrelink has made a decision that you disagree with about a payment or a debt or any of that sort of thing, it's actually a legal issue, and it's your right to get legal advice and to get some legal help. The next slide, please. So, as I always say every time I talk to anyone, this is information only, it's not legal advice. I'm a lawyer, you know, I need to say that and I want to say that. So come to us, go to legal aid, get legal advice if you need it. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about Centrelink and we're talking about people accessing Centrelink and trying to access that social safety net and to get that financial support from the government, it is an enormous system. So for carers allowance and carers payment there, you can see that back in December last year, we're talking over 900,000 people in Australia that are getting carer payment and carer allowance. But when we're actually talking about carers, people who are carers don't only access those payments. A huge percentage of people who are on job seeker payment are actually carers on disability support pension, on age pension, on a lot of the other payments. They're actually carers. And so there's a huge number of people in the social security system who are carers who are trying to navigate the system. And it is an enormous system. And when you're talking about a system as big as that, mistakes will happen. And when they happen to people, they feel personal. People think that the mistakes are never malicious, but it is an enormous system and they will happen. Next slide, please, Hayden. So just to give you an idea of what the options are and what's available to you or your clients, these are the payments that are most commonly accessed by carers. These aren't the limit to the payments. There are others available. When you're talking about carer allowance and family tax benefit, then you can access the allowance and the family tax benefit when you're also receiving any of those other payments. But you can only get job seeker, carer payment and disability support pension as individual payments. You can't get those three concurrently. There's different requirements for accessing it. There's different obligations that you have for every payment. Every payment has different things associated with it that you have to be aware of. And if you're not aware of them, you might lose your eligibility. You might find that you are found to be ineligible when really you may otherwise be, or you might find that you actually end up with a debt if you've done something that maybe you shouldn't have done. The next slide, please. But the two main payments, and the ones that people most often think about when they're talking about carers and talking about Centrelink, is the carer payment and the care allowance. Now, there are actually some very fundamental and quite significant differences between the two. And it's really important to be aware of it because there's risks involved if you don't follow and you're not aware. But also, you might be have the right to get more money than you're actually receiving. And just because you're not aware of that, you haven't been able to access that payment. So one of the things that people often don't realise is that the care allowance can be received twice. You can actually get double the care allowance if you're caring for 2 or more people. You can't get it 3 times, but you can get it twice. So it's really important that if you're caring for 2 people, you actually let Centrelink know so that you can get it twice. Carer payment, if 2 people are required to care for one person and they both qualify for all of the other different things that are needed for carer payment, then 2 people can get carer payment for care of the one person. So just because one person has applied, it doesn't prevent someone else from applying. When you're looking at the difference between those 2 payments, the differences are going to cover the care needs of the person who's being cared for. Income and asset tests between the 2 payments are different. Where you are located, where you're providing the care, is actually different between the 2 payments. Carer payment, you have to be in the home of the person needing the care. Care allowance, the person needing care can come to your home each day, or you can go to their home. If you don't follow those requirements and Centrelink notices that you've been getting the payment without following the requirements, you will get a debt. So you need to be aware of what your rights and obligations are. And look, don't forget that if your income and assets mean that you're not eligible for the carer payment, that income and asset test is different for care allowance, and you might be eligible for that, even though you're not eligible for the carer payment. Next slide, please, Hayden. So what I thought I'd do is I'd give you a couple of top tips, things that I've discovered over the years that aren't necessarily noticed or readily available. So it's just, if you can remember these for your clients or for yourself, it might help. If you or someone you know is thinking about quitting their job, moving house, changing their life significantly in order to provide care for someone, and they're going to be relying on the carer payment, they can actually test their eligibility before making those life-changing decisions. They can fill out the application and they can submit it. They just make sure they don't sign it. Don't sign it. But you can submit it in order to test your eligibility before you make those changes to your life, and then make that decision. If it turns out that it's going to work out and you're eligible for the payment, well, then you can, sell the house, quit the job, do whatever you need, lodge your actual formal application with your signature and go. A lot of people forget that they're actually allowed 63 days respite a year if they're a carer and receiving carer payment or allowance. So that's 63 days in a year where someone else is able to care for the person needing care, and you get that day off, that break, and that moment to recharge or that moment to do your domestic admin and things like that. And another thing that's really helpful, if Centrelink is questioning that you're actually providing the care that you need to be providing to stay eligible for a payment, start keeping a diary. So write down in your diary the days you go to their house or the days that you're providing care and where you are, the hours you're doing it, when you arrive, when you leave, what you're doing, whether it's, sorting out the pills, whether it's offering them a shower, whether it's taking them to the toilet, whatever it is, just jot it all down. And remember, if one of the things that you're doing is just making sure they're safe, just being around to watch over and monitor them to make sure they're safe, that's care. Supervision is care when it comes to Centrelink payments. So just remember that. Okay, next slide, please. So another thing I wanted to let you know about is that there is a newly arrived residents waiting period for a lot of payments that carers access and carers need. It's been recognised in the past that the care needs are quite important, and so some of the payments that that are specifically designed for people that are either caring for people with physical or intellectual care needs, but also those payments that are for people who have parental care needs, that those payments are quite important. And the waiting period that people have after they arrive in Australia and after they get a permanent residency are significantly less than a lot of the other payments. So you can see there that there's a 2-year waiting period for people for carer payment and a 1-year waiting period for people with carer allowance. And those, but those are going to be changing. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Hayden. So in the budget this year, it was proposed that every payment newly arrived residents waiting period be changed, that all of those payment waiting periods be increased from payments that either had no waiting period, 1 year or 2 years, and they all be increased up to 4 years. So carer payment is proposed to change from 2 years to 4 years, and carer allowance is proposed to change from 1 year to 4 years. Now, at the moment, that's not confirmed that it'll be happening. At the moment, that piece of legislation is still before the House of Reps and it hasn't yet been passed, but the Senate has just released a report saying that they are, just in the last couple of days, saying that they're in support of this particular change in the legislation. And so once it gets through the House of Reps and goes to the Senate, it is highly likely to be passed. So just be aware that if you have clients or people you know that are arriving in Australia from the 1st of January 2022 onwards, they are likely to have different waiting periods to access the social security than people who arrived in Australia before that date. Next slide, please. So another thing, if you're accessing a carer payment, carer allowance, disability support pension, any of those payments that rely on a recognition of someone's health needs, then the medical evidence is critical. The quality of that evidence and the content of that medical evidence is critical. And for disability support pension especially, it is a part of the navigating the social security system that is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. A lot of doctors will refuse to allocate time to writing reports and filling in forms for accessing a social security payment. Doctors can no longer be compelled to fill in these forms and write these reports, and there's no Medicare item that doctors can claim to bulk bill on for that type of service that they're providing their patients. Unfortunately, if you have a doctor who is flatly refusing to provide this service, you're going to have to change doctors. And so if you're knocked back as a result of medical evidence, though, if you're rejected for a payment because of the content of your medical evidence, you can appeal. You can appeal the decision, and while you're waiting for the appeal, you can go off and get more evidence. You can submit evidence later, you can submit your evidence, your medical evidence, again at any time throughout the process of trying to get onto the payment. So the one thing that we do say with all of these things is just apply. Get your application in, test your eligibility. You can update your evidence later, but test your eligibility and apply as soon as you can. You only get paid from the day you put your application in, if you're successful in your application. So the sooner you get it, the more money you get. Hayden, the next slide, please. Just as a bit of information, there's a couple of different resources out there that you might be able to access in order to help you get improved medical evidence for DSP. I don't know of any different resources out there for improved evidence for carers payment and allowance, but there are standard Centrelink forms for those two payments, whereas disability support pension is a lot more open-ended. So if you head to Economic Justice Australia, there's a fact sheet. They've got a fact sheet. We also have template reports that you can give to your doctors, and we have copies of the impairment tables. You just need to contact us and ask. And Social Security Rights Victoria has a medical evidence bot that you can use to go through and work out what your medical evidence needs to be. Next slide, please, Hayden. One of the other things I wanted to remind everyone about or let people know is that Centrelink does have social workers, and they can be difficult to get a hold of and to get an appointment with. They're not full-time in every service centre anymore, but we always advise people to call and try and ask. You just need to call any of the normal numbers, say that you're wanting an appointment with a social worker. It'll be a telephone number, and they will hopefully be able to make the appointment for you. It's incredibly useful if you or your client or someone you know is experiencing family and domestic violence, if there are mental health issues that the person needing the payment is contending with, or that the person you're caring for is contending with. Personal and family crises are also one of those things that are part of the policy in order to get to get access to the social workers. Next slide, please. So just as a piece of information, any decision by Centrelink can be appealed. Not every decision should be appealed. There's risks in appealing some decisions, but every Centrelink decision can be appealed. Next slide, please. There's time limits to lodging your appeal though. So this is a slide that you'll be able to get if you get a hold of this presentation. If you don't lodge your appeal within those time limits and you are successful in your appeal, and part of that appeal is actually to be granted a payment or an increased payment, if you don't lodge in time, you won't be back paid to the date that you originally applied for the payment. So by not lodging in time, you lose money. It's a serious financial cost if you don't lodge within time, and also they just may not accept your appeal. The next slide, please. If you want to contact Centrelink to lodge an appeal, it's really, really, really straightforward. It's incredibly simple. It's ringing. It's just call any of the Centrelink numbers and say, I would like to appeal the decision. This is the decision was made and I would like to appeal it. Get a receipt number just so that you've got proof that you did it, but it's a really simple process. If you actually don't want to appeal, if you're a little bit worried about what risks there might be, and you just want to know why the decision's made, you ring up and you say, I would like an explanation of the decision. And that is also a formal service that they now offer, is an explanation of a decision or a formal appeal. So if you've already had an appeal by Centrelink, you've already gone through that formal appeals process within Centrelink, then there is an external appeals process. You can appeal to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and the tribunal is set up in order for self-represented people to get help. So it's a really, really simple process to just call the tribunal and appeal. The next slide, please. So look, the last few slides are just information if you've got clients who need legal advice or are having problems with Centrelink. This is our telephone line and when we're open for clients to call us. And if you pop to the next slide, this is our telephone lines in order to contact us. So Illawarra is there. Clients can call us on those numbers there. If you're a service provider and you are assisting clients, then you are welcome to call us on the admin line or send us an email. If you're an individual needing help yourself, please don't use those lines. You will just get told to call back on the advice line, and it'll just be frustrating for you. And if you're a service and you would like training in Social Security, then you're welcome to contact me on that telephone number and email. Once again, please don't use that email. if you're a client and you're needing to contact me, because I am unable to take those. I won't take those emails. I can only take emails about training and workshop requests. And then the last slide. And look, follow us on social media. We do updates constantly on any changes in Social Security. So all of the COVID-19 changes and all of the things that are affecting people with COVID-19, we are constantly updating on social media. And if we have any community education sessions happening, then we also notify people on social media as well about those. So then, is there any questions that anyone would like me to answer? Melissa, maybe you can read them out for me.
Hi, I also just wanted to apologise. I did miss some before for the last presentation, so I'm really sorry if your question got missed. I did notice that someone had gone back and responded to a number of those, so my apologies again. There was a question for the last presentation, but it's probably quite relevant to yourself as well. Just somebody asking about having a client-facing issue with issues with Centrelink at the moment that had been paying off a debt, but has just been informed the debt has returned, and she does not understand, is this service one that would be able to help
Yeah,
her to figure out what's happening?
that's exactly the sort of things that we help with. That's precisely what we do. That's what we do day to day, helping people to understand why Centrelink has made a decision, but also debts can be appealed. Please don't tell your client to appeal it. There are risks to appealing debts. You can appeal a debt of $200 and Centrelink might decide that actually it should have been $2,000. So don't appeal a debt without getting advice. But we will be able to advise your client, one, on why this debt has suddenly reappeared, and two, whether actually maybe she doesn't have to repay it and she can get it waived.
Yep, and the tax clinic have also just flagged that if it is in relation to a tax debt, that also isn't to do with Centrelink, they may also be able to assist, but you probably just need some more information about what that one is in relation to. The other question that came through was, can young carers apply for carer payment and carer allowance?
Uh, Off the top of my head, I cannot remember the age restrictions for carers. I imagine that when you're talking about a young carer, you are talking about, say, someone in high school, a teenager. Off the top of my head, I don't know. If you wanted to send me your details, I'd be happy to look it up later and let you know. If you have someone who is hoping to apply or has applied and been rejected, then send them to us. Or not if they're hoping to apply, tell them to apply. Test your eligibility. We'll always say, test your eligibility, put in an application. If they've been rejected, send them to us. Let's see what we can do to help.
Great. And I'll just double check because I missed those ones earlier. I think that was all of the ones for this presentation. Can you assist carers with reporting their of work in relation to their carer payment or allowance?
If they are struggling to use MyGov or struggling to get through to Centrelink in order to report, unfortunately, that's not a Centrelink decision. So it's something that they'll have to contact Centrelink about. If Centrelink has said that there's an issue with their payment and have reduced their payment or cancelled their payment because of their work, and that was incorrect, and that actually that issue with what Centrelink is saying is wrong, send them to us. We're really happy to help. If they have been receiving the payment for a significant period of time and have realised that they have not been reporting their work correctly and they are worried about the consequences when they tell Centrelink, then we're also incredibly happy to assist them with that and give them some advice on that.
Great. We've just hit the time. So thank you again so much, Donna, and all of our presenters for today, and for the audience and for your questions. And we will wrap up now this session. And you can just jump back into the main auditorium for the closing plenary.